Have you ever looked at a CEO's paycheck, the ones that are hundreds of times bigger than the average workers, and just wondered how? Or why things like housing and electricity just keep getting more expensive and seem to be owned by fewer and fewer giant companies? Well, it turns out it's all connected. There's this hidden system, a story that starts with a once illegal corporate trick that's now created this powerful, invisible loop of money and influence that really shapes our entire economy. All right, let's dive right in. And we're going to start with a number that honestly sets the stage for everything else we're about to uncover. So let's rewind to the mid-1960s. Back then, the average CEO of a big company made about 20 times more than their typical employee, 20 to 1. Now, fast forward to today, that ratio has absolutely exploded to nearly 300 to 1. I mean, this isn't just a small jump. It's a massive shift in how our corporations work. It's an explosion. So what gives? How on earth did this happen? Well, this wasn't some accident or a slow natural evolution. The answer really lies in what seems like a small, kind of boring rule change back in the early 80s that completely flipped the script on how companies use their money and, in turn, how the people at the top pay themselves.
Before 1982, something called a stock buyback was basically considered illegal. It was seen as straight-up market manipulation. The thinking was pretty simple. A company shouldn't be allowed to just artificially pump up its own stock price. But then, the SEC brought in this new rule, 10b-18, which created a safe harbor, basically giving buybacks the green light. And almost overnight, what used to be a crime became business as usual.
So how does this little corporate magic trick work? Well, a company takes its profits and instead of, say, investing in new products or raising wages, it uses that money to buy its own shares from the stock market. Now, there are fewer shares out there, which makes each of the remaining ones more valuable. And just like that, the stock price goes up, without the company actually doing anything to get better or more innovative. And here's where the incentive comes in, and it's a big one. About 80% of a typical CEO's pay is directly tied to how well the company's stock is doing. So for them, stock buybacks are this irresistible tool. It's a super easy way to give their own paychecks a massive boost, often at the expense of things like long-term growth or better pay for their employees. Okay, so obviously the CEOs are highly motivated to do this, but they aren't the only ones cashing in. To really get the full picture, we have to ask, who are the other big players here? Who are these giant shareholders that are demanding these buybacks in the first place? The answer to that question leads us to just a handful of incredibly powerful firms that have, kind of quietly, become the biggest owners of, well, pretty much everything. Let me introduce you to the big three: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. These are asset management firms, and they handle a truly staggering amount of money. We're talking trillions of dollars. And here's the thing, a lot of this is our money. It's the money in public pension funds, in our 401ks, in the insurance plans that millions of us are counting on. Their main product, their secret sauce, is the index fund. See, instead of trying to pick a few winning companies, an index fund just buys a little piece of every company in a big market index, like the S&P 500. The analogy here is perfect. It's literally like betting on every single horse in the race. You're guaranteed to own a piece of the winner, no matter who it is. And if you want to see just how much power this gives them, just look at a company like Amazon. Get this, the big three together own a bigger chunk of Amazon than its own founder, Jeff Bezos. That's insane. And this isn't just an Amazon thing. This pattern repeats itself across almost every major company you can think of. This has created a situation that people call universal ownership. Because they are the single biggest shareholder in nearly every major corporation, they have this immense voting power. And when you look at the data, they almost always vote right alongside management on key issues like executive pay and, you guessed it, stock buybacks. So we have this really powerful alliance between the CEOs and these huge shareholders. They're all on the same page. But where do the actual strategies for cutting costs and juicing those profits come from? Where's the playbook? Well, that's where the elite management consultants come in. Firms like McKinsey & Company. They're hired by CEOs to provide the fancy spreadsheets and strategic justifications for making tough, often painful decisions. You could say they provide the intellectual cover for things like mass layoffs or deep budget cuts. A really stark example of this happened at Disneyland back in the 90s. McKinsey was hired, and they recommended a major overhaul of the park's maintenance program to save money. But what happened next was a series of tragic accidents, which were later linked directly to failures in staffing and maintenance, the very things that had been cut. You see how this works, right? When something goes wrong, the consultants can say, hey, we just made recommendations. And the CEO can say, well, we were just following the advice of experts. It creates this system where accountability becomes incredibly fuzzy, all while these painful decisions get justified by complex-sounding analysis. So this system has been incredibly effective at generating huge profits for shareholders. But what happens when that mountain of cash gets so big that it needs new places to go? Well, it's starting to move beyond just the stock market and into the physical world all around us.
These financial giants are now using all that capital to buy up what they call real assets. And that's just finance speak for the tangible stuff we all need to live. Our houses, our hospitals, water systems, power plants, even farmland.
And the playbook for this is pretty simple and, frankly, pretty brutal. Step 1, you buy a company that provides something people absolutely can't live without. Step 2, you strip it for parts. You cut costs, lay people off, and jack up prices for customers who have no other choice. And finally, after a few years, you sell the hollowed-out shell of the company for a massive profit.
And this isn't just a theory, it is happening right now. For example, BlackRock is trying to buy Minnesota Power. And this has sparked huge outrage among the local residents, like Bob Tamman here, who are terrified about what happens when a private financial firm whose only goal was short-term profit gets control of a public necessity. Okay, this all brings us to the final and maybe the most mind-bending piece of the entire puzzle. And that's how this system actually sustains itself, how it reinforces its own power.
So you have to ask, who owns these giant asset managers? Who owns the owners? Well, when you look into it, you find something pretty startling. The single biggest shareholder in BlackRock is its main rival, Vanguard.
And who is the biggest shareholder in Vanguard? Well, you probably guessed it by now, it's BlackRock. It is a completely closed loop. The largest, most powerful financial firms in the world are in fact each other's biggest owners. The financial system, in a very real way, owns itself. So what we have is this self-owning, self-reinforcing system. It was built on a trick, stock buybacks, that made executives and huge shareholders incredibly rich. And now, that same system is expanding to take control of the actual infrastructure of our daily lives. So it really leaves us with one final critical question. When a system is designed to own itself, who is it ultimately built to serve?